Everything in my world is built on order. At Fort Hood, Texas, the discipline of the U.S. Army isn't just a career, it's the wall I built to bury the past. I was performing a routine administrative inspection in General Robert Alden's office. The polished mahogany desk, the crisply placed flags, everything reflecting his authority. I was halfway through my checklist until my eyes landed on a photograph. A 6-year-old girl, brown curls, haunting blue eyes. The silver frame was engraved with the name, Emily. The world went silent. I knew that face. It was Lily, my best friend from St. Mary's Orphanage. The folder slipped from my hand, scattering papers across the plush carpet. My throat closed. "Is there a problem, Major Estes?" General Alden's voice cut through the silence, sharp and authoritative. He had seen me tremble. I turned, struggling to find my soldier's voice. "Sir, this girl, the child in the picture." He glanced at the photo, then looked at me like I was a ghost, and asked the question that broke everything. "You mean my missing daughter?" The hum of the building's air conditioning, the distant sound of boots on linoleum, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. It all vanished. There was only the roaring in my ears and the general's face, a mask of hardened grief staring at me, waiting for an answer I couldn't comprehend. Your daughter, sir?" My voice was a stranger's, thin and cracked. I pointed, my hand visibly shaking. "That girl. I know her. Her name is Lily. We grew up together, at St. Mary's Orphanage in Waco." The name dropped into the pressurized silence of the room like a stone. General Alden's eyes, which I had only ever seen as sharp instruments of command, widened. He didn't move. "St. Mary's?" he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. That's impossible." He took a step toward the desk, his gaze fixed on the silver frame. "Emily, my daughter, Emily. She was kidnapped from our home in Dallas 20 years ago. She was 4. A cold dread, colder than any Texas winter, washed over me. I did the math, my disciplined mind running calculations against the sudden, violent surge of my heart. "Sir," I said, forcing the words out. "I knew Lily from the time we were 6. We met at St. Mary's when I was 6. The unsaid words hung between us, heavy and toxic. 2 years after his 4-year-old daughter was taken from Dallas, she reappeared 2 hours away in Waco as a 6-year-old orphan named Lily. The implication was horrific. A kidnapping was a tragedy. This was a conspiracy. It meant someone had found his daughter, hidden her, renamed her, and thrown her into the system. They hadn't just stolen a child, they had erased her. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, a direct strike against the very foundation of my reality. Everything I believed about my past, my only friend, my own identity as an orphan. Was it all a lie? General Alden stumbled, catching himself on the edge of his immaculate mahogany desk. The facade of the commanding officer was gone, replaced by a father 20 years broken. "My God," he whispered. He sank into his leather chair, his eyes locking on mine, pleading. "My wife, Margaret. She passed away 10 years ago. She went to her grave believing our little girl was dead, that we'd never find her." He choked on the words, and I watched, frozen, as this powerful man began to come apart. My military training warred with the ghost of the child I had been. Tessa. Major Estes needed facts. Tessa needed answers. "Sir, I need to be sure," I said, my voice regaining a fraction of its steadfastness. The Lily I knew. She was quiet, always drawing. She drew airplanes, hundreds of them. Said they would fly her away to find her dad. The general let out a sharp, pained breath. "Emily. She loved planes. I was a pilot before I moved to command." "There's more," I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "She had a birthmark. It was small, on the left side of her neck, just below the ear. It was shaped like a crescent moon." That was the final blow. General Alden didn't just flinch, he nearly collapsed. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with a grief so profound it filled the room. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red, raw, and full of a terrible, dawning certainty. Emily had that mark too, he confirmed, his voice ragged. Her mother used to call it her little moonbeam. The administrative inspection was over. The neatly ordered checklist in my hand was now just a meaningless piece of paper. The world I had built, a world of regulations, honor codes, and the clear-cut black and white of the U.S. Army, had just been shattered into a million shades of gray. General Alden stood up, his posture still that of a military man, but his eyes were those of a father who had just been handed both a miracle and a nightmare. He looked at me, not as a superior officer addressing a subordinate, but as a man begging for help. "Major," he said, his voice steeling itself, hardening with a new, terrifying purpose. "I gave you an order once to secure this base. Now I am giving you a new one." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Find out who stole my daughter. Find out who did this." I stood at attention, the papers still scattered at my feet. "Sir, that's not my jurisdiction. Outside my authority. A career-ending request." But I didn't say any of that, because in that moment, I wasn't just Major Celine Estes, I was Tessa. And I was looking at a picture of Lily. The U.S. Army values are loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. I had lived my life by them. But another, older code was rising up inside me, a promise made by one terrified child to another in the dark of a dormitory at St. Mary's. "I understand, sir." I didn't sleep that night. My quarters at Fort Hood felt cold, sterile. The medals and ribbons hanging on my dress uniform, the armor I had so carefully assembled over 15 years, seemed worthless, like polished trinkets. They were for Major Estes, a woman who followed orders and believed in the system. But the system had failed Lily. I sat on the edge of my bed, the silence of the night amplifying the one memory I'd tried to bury deeper than all the others. It was the day I was adopted. I was leaving. Lily had grabbed my hand, her small body trembling. "Don't go, Tessa. Don't leave me here." "I'll come back for you, Lily Pad," I had promised, my own voice tight with tears. "I promise." And she had looked at me with those haunting blue eyes and whispered the words that had echoed in my nightmares ever since. "Tessa will never abandon me." But I had. I had been adopted, given a new name, a new life, and I had left her behind. The guilt was a physical weight, one I had carried into every mission, every promotion. Now, I knew. She hadn't just been left behind. She had been hidden. The rage, the guilt, and the shock coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't a general's order anymore. This was a personal mission. This was about keeping a promise. At 0400, I moved from my bed to the desk. I opened my government-issued laptop, the green glow of the screen illuminating my face. My fingers, steady and sure, moved over the keys. I bypassed my military network and opened a standard browser. In the search bar, I typed the words that would end one life and begin another. St. Mary's Orphanage, Waco, TX. My new mission had officially begun. The decision made at 0400 was an order my body executed at 0500. There was no sleep, only the cold, sharp focus of a new mission. Driving south on Interstate 35 from Fort Hood to Waco is a straight shot, a river of asphalt cutting through the dry, rolling hills of central Texas. I'd made the drive before, but as a different person. I'd driven it as Major Estes, attending mandatory training or meeting with reserve units. This time, I was driving it as Tessa. The trip was a little over an hour, but it felt like traveling 20 years back in time. The disciplined air of Fort Hood, all steel and procedure, evaporated, replaced by the humid, heavy memories of Waco. I left my government sedan parked on the street, not in the visitor's lot, and stood for a moment, just looking at the building, St. Mary's Orphanage. It hadn't changed. A squat two-story brick building that always seemed to be gray, even on the sunniest Texas day. The sign out front was faded, the paint peeling. As I walked through the double doors, the past hit me like a physical force. The smell. It was the same exact smell, locked in the walls. Industrial-grade bleach and the watery, metallic tang of thin potato soup. It was the smell of being poor, of being institutional, of being a problem to be managed. My boots clicked on the old linoleum floor, a sound far too sharp and authoritative for this place. A small, elderly nun looked up from a desk. Her face, wrinkled and kind, broke into a smile. "Tessa? My goodness. Tessa, is that you?" It took me a second. "Sister Agnes." She hurried around the desk, her arms open. I was stiff, unused to this, but I let her hug me. She was the only kind one. "We were so proud when we heard you'd joined the army," she said, pulling back. My, a major. Look at you." "It's good to see you, sister," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. This was a reconnaissance mission. "I'm here on a personal matter. I'm looking for information about another girl who was here with me." "Lily?" Sister Agnes's smile faded. "Ah, sweet Lily. Yes. I remember her." She led me to a back office, a tiny room filled with filing cabinets that looked as old as the building. That poor, dear child. She pulled open a drawer marked LM. She was so sad when she first came to us. Do you remember Tessa? She used to cry every single night for the first year, just sit on her cot and cry, calling for her daddy. My heart clenched. Calling for her daddy. A daddy who was in Dallas, searching the country for her. Sister Agnes pulled out a file. It was pathetically thin. My own military record was thicker than a phone book. Lily's entire life was a few stapled sheets of cheap paper. Sister Agnes handed it to me. She was transferred out in 2006. A nice couple, I was told. I opened the file, my fingers tracing the faded ink. Lily. Age 6. Admitted. Age 8. Transferred. I was looking for a name, a family, anything. Instead, all I found was a code. Transfer authorized by State Social Services, I read aloud. Reference code 77HC. "That's all it says," Sister Agnes said, her voice full of sorrow. It was all handled by the state. It was very sudden, as I recall. I held that thin file in my hand. The cheap paper, the bureaucratic code. It all felt so cold. And as I stood there, the smell of bleach and old soup filling my lungs, the past didn't just tap me on the shoulder. It grabbed me by the throat. The memory was so vivid, it was almost real. I wasn't Major Estes, I was 8-year-old Tessa, and I was back in the cafeteria. Lily had just dropped her bowl. The sound of cheap ceramic shattering on the linoleum echoed in the huge, half-empty room. Thin potato soup and broken pieces spread across the floor. Lily froze, her small body trembling, and then the shadow fell over us. Mrs. Gable, the orphanage manager, a large, bitter woman who seemed to hate the very children she was paid to care for. "You clumsy, stupid girl." Gable's voice wasn't a yell, it was a growl. Lily flinched, tears instantly welling in her blue eyes. I'm sorry." Slap. The sound was sharp, like a firecracker. Mrs. Gable had slapped Lily across the face, so hard the little girl stumbled backward. "Sorry doesn't fix the plate, you useless girl," Gable loomed over her. "You think anyone cares about you? You think you're special? Your parents dumped you at a gas station like garbage. You're nothing." I saw red. Before I could even think, I had launched myself forward, a tiny, furious shield, standing between Gable and Lily. "Leave her alone," I yelled, my own small fists clenched. Mrs. Gable just laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. She looked down at me, and then at Lily hiding behind me. Her lip curled in that familiar sneer. "Oh, look," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Two pieces of trash, protecting each other. You listen to me, Tessa. You think you're tough? You think you matter?" She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than any slap. "You will never be anything, neither of you. You're the discards of society. You're worthless." I snapped back to the present. My hand was gripping the file so tightly, the paper was crumpled. Sister Agnes was looking at me, her head tilted in concern. Tessa? Are you all right, dear? I forced my hand to relax. I took a slow, steadying breath, shoving the 8-year-old girl back into her box. Major Estes was back in control. Mrs. Gable, I said, my voice cold. Is she still here? Oh, heavens no, Sister Agnes said, crossing herself. She was let go years ago. Thank the Lord. A cruel woman. She was a monster. Those words, trash, worthless, discards, they weren't just insults. They were a branding. They were the reason I joined the army. They were the reason I pushed myself to be perfect, to be so disciplined, so valuable, that no one could ever call me worthless again. And they were the words that had defined Lily's entire stolen life. Sister, I said, my tone shifting back to the investigation. You said the transfer was sudden. Do you remember who came for her? The social worker? Sister Agnes thought for a moment, tapping her chin. No, it wasn't a social worker. I remember now. It was a man. A very polite, official-looking man. She looked at my uniform, the bars on my shoulders, the ribbons on my chest. He was a soldier, Major, she said. He was dressed just like you. My blood ran cold. A soldier? Yes. He said it was an emergency. A special program. He said Lily's foster family was in a different part of the state and they had to move her immediately because of a storm. A storm. I kept my face perfectly neutral. A storm in 2006. Thank you, sister. You've been more help than you can imagine. I walked out of St. Mary's, the code 77HC, and a single word, storm, burning in my mind. I got into my car and sat there for a full minute, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. There was no storm in Waco in 2006. Not a hurricane, not a tornado, not anything that would warrant an emergency military relocation of one orphan. This wasn't a bureaucratic error, it was a deliberate, military-grade deception. Someone had used the authority of the U.S. Army uniform, my uniform, to sign out a child under a false pretense and make her disappear. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from a blocked number. It was from General Alden. Be careful. Some ghosts wear uniforms. That woman's words from 20 years ago echoed in my head. Discards of society. They were meant to break us, to make us believe we were worthless. But she was wrong. If you've ever had someone try to make you feel worthless, if you're rooting for Tessa and Lily to prove them all wrong, support this story with a like. And tell me in the comments, who was one person who believed in you when no one else did? I looked at the general's text. Code 77HC. A soldier. A lie about a storm. He was right. I was hunting ghosts. The search for Emily Alden was no longer a personal mission. It was an investigation into a crime, one covered up with the very honor I had sworn my life to. The drive back to Fort Hood from Waco was a silent storm of focus. The rage from Mrs. Gable's memory had been channeled, compressed into the cold, hard diamond of my resolve. I had 2 pieces of actionable intelligence, a code, 77HC, and a lie, the storm. A lie that was delivered by a U.S. Army soldier. My mind had already been running scenarios. The logical assumption was that this was connected to Undersecretary Harold Vance, a powerful man, a ghost in the system, as the general had warned. But assumptions are just theories without proof. I needed to trace the code. Back in my office, long after midnight, I didn't use my government computer. I used a secure burner phone to make a call to the one person I trusted inside the Pentagon's labyrinth. Brooks, a sharp, no-nonsense voice answered. Elena, it's Celine. I need a favor. Off the record. Captain Elena Brooks and I had come up through the JAG Corps together. She was sharper than a scalpel and fiercely loyal. If anyone could navigate the Pentagon's archives, it was her. Off the record, that's my favorite kind, Major, she whispered, and I could hear the click of her keyboard. What are you into? I'm tracing a personnel transfer from 06. A civilian child moved from a Waco orphanage under military authority. The code is 77HC. I paused. I need to know if it connects to Undersecretary Vance. There was a long silence on the other end, just the rapid tapping of keys. Elena knew better than to ask why I was asking about one of the most powerful men in Washington. Okay, 77HC, she murmured. Give me a minute. This is weird, Celine. Weird how? It's an old logistics code, and you're right, it's military. But it's not from DC, it's not political. I felt a drop of cold confusion. If not Vance, then who? It was processed by a logistics branch right there in your backyard. Killeen, Elena continued, under the authority of a Colonel M. Matthews. He's retired now. Matthews, I repeated, etching the name into my memory. But that's not the weird part, Elena said, her voice dropping lower. The request for the 77HC transfer didn't come from the Army. The Army just executed the move. The request came from a private entity, a charity fund, the Undone Family Fund. The air in my office felt thin. You mean the General's Fund? No, Elena said, and I could hear the confusion in her voice too. The signatory on the request. It's Margaret Undone. I stared at the blank wall of my office. That's impossible, Elena. Margaret Undone has been dead for 10 years. I don't know what to tell you, Celine. The electronic signature on this transfer, dated 2006, is Margaret Undone. It's right here. It's clean. Way too clean. My mind was reeling. A ghost had signed the order. I thanked Elena and hung up. The investigation I thought was aimed at Washington had just taken a sharp, impossible turn into the grave. The next day was Saturday. I found Colonel M. Matthews, retired, living in Georgetown, Texas. It's a wealthy, pristine suburb just north of Austin, full of immaculate lawns and sprawling brick homes where high-ranking officers go to enjoy their generous pensions. I drove my personal car, a simple black sedan. I was out of uniform, wearing jeans and a simple blue button-down. This was not official business. This was personal. I found Matthews in his backyard. It was the absolute picture of a Texas Saturday. He was a portly man in a kiss-the-cook apron, standing before a massive, gleaming silver smoker. The air was rich with the smell of hickory smoke and slow-cooked beef. He smiled when I walked up the driveway. Well, hello there. Can I help you? Colonel Matthews? I asked, flashing my military ID. Major Celine Estes, Fort Hood. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes tightened. The good old boy network was closing ranks. A major? All the way out here? Must be important. You want a beer? I'm just about to wrap this brisket. I'm not here for a social call, sir. My voice was flat, cutting through the warm, smoky air. I'm here to talk about a transfer order you signed in 2006, code 77HC. The smile vanished. The color drained from his face. Got him. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, turning to fuss with the smoker's temperature gauge. A child from St. Mary's in Waco, a girl named Lily. You used a false storm report as a pretext for an emergency transfer. Matthews dropped his barbecue tongs. They clattered on the stone patio. That was standard procedure, a humanitarian relocation. It was all by the book. Was it by the book to take your orders from a civilian? I asked. It wasn't a state request, Colonel. It was signed by Margaret Undone. He visibly trembled. The man in the kiss-the-cook apron was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered rat. He was sweating profusely now, and it wasn't from the Texas heat. You don't understand, he whispered, looking around his perfect manicured yard as if assassins might be hiding in the rose bushes. You have to. You don't. Why? I pressed, stepping closer. Why would you do it? It was a personal favor, he burst out, his voice a panicked squeak. Mrs. Undone. She was a great benefactor to the base, a huge contributor. She was a very powerful woman. Powerful enough to make a colonel hide a child? Why? Matthews looked at me, his eyes full of a 20-year-old guilt. She said the girl was a mistake, he whispered, the word hanging ugly in the air. She said the child was a threat to the family's stability, that the general was in a fragile state, that he would never get over it if he knew the truth. The truth about what? I demanded. Matthews flinched. He wouldn't tell me. He just said, He just said that Margaret called the girl the bastard. My blood ran cold. The bastard. The entire narrative shifted. This wasn't a political kidnapping. This was a family purge. A wife lying to her husband, using the power of the U.S. Army to erase her husband's mistake. General Alden wasn't a conspirator. He was the target of the conspiracy. His own wife, the woman he thought had died of grief, had been the one to stick the knife in his back. She had lied to him for years, letting him search for a daughter she had already found and buried. I had what I needed. I turned to go, leaving Matthews to his brisket and his conscience. "Major, wait!" he called out, his voice desperate. I turned back. "You're in over your head," he pleaded, taking a step toward me. "You're going up against a woman who buried a child alive to protect her reputation. She will not hesitate to bury you." "Mrs. Alden is dead, Colonel." He let out a dry, choked laugh. "You think that matters? You think death stops people like that?" He shook his head, his eyes wide with a fear that went beyond me. "That man in Washington, Undersecretary Harold Vance, he's not just a political ally." He leaned in, and his final words hit me like a physical blow. "He's her brother. He'll protect his family. He will protect her." I stood frozen on the perfect green lawn. It all clicked into place. The power, the cover-up, the lie. This wasn't a simple investigation. It was a wall. A wall of the elite, built by family, cemented by power. And I was standing on the outside, a lone major with nothing but a ghost story. The drive from Georgetown back to Fort Hood was a blur of adrenaline and ice. The smoky smell of Matthews's barbecue grill was gone, replaced by the sterile, recycled air of my car, Margaret Alden. The name was a death knell. A wife, supposedly dead from grief, was the architect of the entire lie. A brother in Washington, Harold Vance, was the enforcer. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a family conspiracy of the highest order, using the U.S. Army as its private cleaning service. And General Alden, he was the primary victim. I drove straight back to the base. The sympathy I felt for him, the shared sense of mission, it was now eclipsed by the urgency of the truth. He had to know. He was the only one with the power to fight a ghost and a sitting undersecretary. I requested an immediate, private audience. His aide, a young captain, looked surprised, but slotted me in. "The general has 10 minutes, Major." I walked into that same office, the one where my world had shattered just days before. The polished mahogany desk, the perfectly aligned flags. It all seemed like a stage set for a play. General Alden was standing by the window, looking out over the parade ground. He looked tired. "Major," he said, not turning. "You have news?" "Yes, sir, I do." My voice was formal, respectful. This was the moment of revelation. This was when he would finally understand the scope of the betrayal. I laid it out with military precision. "Sir, I traced the 77HC code. The transfer was authorized by a Colonel Matthews, retired from a Killeen Logistics Unit." He turned, his eyes fixed on me. "Go on." "Matthews confessed, sir. He said the order didn't come from the Army. It came from a private fund." I took a breath, bracing myself to deliver the blow. The Alden Family Fund. The signatory was Margaret Alden. I expected shock. I expected grief. I expected rage. What I got was silence, a cold, heavy, terrifying silence. General Alden's face, which had been open and vulnerable, hardened. The mask of the two-star general snapped back into place. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Major Estes," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Are you standing in my office, telling me you are accusing my wife?" The words were so cold, so sharp, I flinched. "Sir, I am reporting." "Your wife," he continued, his voice rising, "who died grieving for the daughter you claim she hid." "General, the evidence." "Evidence?" He took a step toward me, his frame seeming to fill the entire room. "What evidence do you have, Major? The ravings of a retired colonel you intimidated? A 20-year-old piece of paper? Sir, Matthews was terrified. He said she called the child a mistake. He said, slap. He didn't hit me. He hit the desk. His open palm came down on the polished mahogany with a crack so loud it sounded like a gunshot. The framed photo of Lily, of Emily, jumped and fell on its face. Enough! He roared. I stood my ground, but my blood ran cold. This wasn't the man who had begged me to find his daughter. This was a different man, a man blinded by a pain so deep he couldn't see the truth. Sir, I am only reporting the facts. Your facts? He shouted, his face now inches from mine, mottled with rage. Or is this the fantasy of a jealous orphan, someone who grew up with nothing, envying what everyone else has? The words hit me like a physical slap. He had taken my deepest wound, my past, the very thing that allowed me to find this case in the first place, and he'd turned it into a weapon. You think you know family, he spat. You think you know pain? You have no idea who you are. Sir? My voice trembled, not with fear, but with a sudden boiling rage. You walk into my office, into my life, with this insane theory. You tear open old wounds, and now you have the audacity to stand there and smear my wife's memory. He was shaking, his grief and his denial twisting into a terrible, cruel fury. She is dead, he yelled. She's the victim here, not you, not this ghost you're chasing. My pain is not yours to play with. He was projecting. He was taking all his rage at Margaret, at his stolen child, at 20 years of lies. And he was aiming it all at the one person who had brought him the truth. Me. General, please, I tried one last time, my training warring with the screaming child inside me. Listen to me. No. I have heard enough. He stabbed his finger at my face, a gesture of absolute, crushing authority. You have gone too far, Major. You are clearly obsessed. You're compromised by your own past. He stalked back behind his desk, his chest heaving, his authority now a crushing weight. I gave you a mission to find my daughter, not to destroy my family, not to desecrate the memory of my wife. He looked at me, his eyes now completely cold, void of all the humanity I had seen before. The executioner was back. Major Estes, you are officially and immediately suspended from this assignment. You will turn in your credentials and your badge to my aide. You are confined to base until further notice. He looked at the door. Now. Get out. My world, which had been cracked, now shattered. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. The soldier took over. My heels clicked together. I brought my hand up in a sharp, perfect salute, my arm rigid, my spine straight. Yes, sir, my voice said. It was clipped, precise, empty. I held the salute until he, almost as an afterthought, returned it. I did a perfect about-face and walked out of the office, but inside, I was hemorrhaging. I was 8-year-old Tessa, being slapped by Mrs. Gable. I was the discard, the piece of trash. I had risked my career. I had dredged up my own trauma. I had done it for him. For Lily? And he hadn't just dismissed me. He hadn't just fired me. He had used my own past to call me a liar, to shame me, to cast me out. This is that moment. The one where you give everything you have, you do the right thing, you risk it all. And in return, you're not just ignored. You're punished. You're told you are the problem. This is for everyone who has ever poured their heart into something, only to be blamed when the truth was too hard for someone else to handle. If you've ever felt that sting of being unfairly accused, hit like to show Celine she's not alone. And tell us in the comments, what's one word you'd use to describe the general right now? I walked past the aide's desk, my face a mask of stone. I didn't stop. I walked out of the command building into the blinding Texas sun. I was no longer an officer. I was no longer an ally. I was just alone. I don't know how long I sat in my car in the command building parking lot. 10 minutes? 20. The Texas sun was a merciless white hammer, beating on the windshield, turning the sedan into a sauna. I didn't feel it. I just felt cold. Finally, my training kicked in. A non-functional soldier is a liability. I put the key in the ignition. I put the car in drive, and I left. I drove. I didn't have a destination. I just drove. I drove past the main gate, past the endless strip malls of Killeen, past the fast food joints and the pawn shops that line the edges of every military town. I was driving aimlessly, a ghost in my own life. Suspended, confined to base. But it was the other words that were stuck on repeat, a vicious loop playing in my head. You're compromised by your own past. Just the fantasy of a jealous orphan. What do you know about family? The mask of major STEs, the one I had spent 20 years building, welding shut, and polishing. It had been shattered. And the thing underneath, the thing I had hidden for so long, was just a scared, 8-year-old girl. Tessa. I pulled over, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and for the first time since I was a child, I put my head down and I wept. I cried. Not the silent, stoic tears of a soldier. I cried with ugly, gasping sobs, the kind that tear out of you from a place you keep locked away. I cried for Lily. I cried for the general. I cried for the 20 stolen years, and I cried for me. Because in that moment, I believed him. Mrs. Gable was right. You're worthless, a discard of society. General Alden was right. A jealous orphan. I had spent my entire adult life running from that little girl, building a fortress of discipline and rank and honor so high that no one could ever touch her. And with just a few words, the general had torn it all down. He had seen right through the uniform and pointed at the one thing I couldn't defend, the truth of my own past. I was worthless. I had tried to help, and I had been punished for it. I was just a piece of trash, trying to play dress-up in a major's uniform. The silence in the car was too loud, filled with the voices of Gable and Alden, a chorus of my deepest fears. I couldn't stand it. I fumbled for the console, jabbing at the touchscreen of my car's stereo, desperate for any noise to drown them out. My phone connected, and a podcast I'd half listened to weeks ago resumed playing. I didn't care what it was. I just needed another voice. And so we are terrified of it, a woman's voice said, her accent a familiar, warm Texas drawl. We are terrified of being seen as weak. We are terrified of being vulnerable. I almost turned it off. The last thing I wanted to hear about was being weak. But here's the thing I've learned from all my research, the voice continued. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's not. In fact, it is our most accurate measure of courage. I froze. My hand, which had been reaching to change the station, just hovered in the air. To be vulnerable, the woman said, her voice full of a gentle, academic certainty. To show up and be seen when you have no control over the outcome. That is the definition of daring greatly. That's being in the arena. And the easiest way to know you're in the arena? You're the one who's getting your ass kicked by the critics in the stands. I knew that voice. It was Brené Brown. Her talks, recorded just down the highway in Austin, were practically required listening for a certain kind of Texan. I'd always found them soft. But right now, her words weren't soft. They were a steel rod running straight up my broken spine. The general, he'd called me weak, I whispered to the empty car. Compromised by my past, obsessed. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. He had taken my past, my orphan past, and used it as a slur. He'd used it to shame me, to dismiss me, to prove that my facts were just the fantasies of a damaged person. And Brené Brown, in her warm Texas accent, was telling me he was wrong. She was telling me that the very thing he called a weakness was actually my strength. It was an aha moment so profound, it was like a physical jolt. I wasn't weak because I cared about Lily. I was strong because I cared. My orphan past wasn't a compromise. It was a superpower. It was the only reason this case existed. 1,000 other officers could have walked into that office, seen that picture, and felt nothing. They would have seen a general's daughter, a pretty girl in a silver frame. But I saw Lily. My vulnerability, my compromised past, was a key. It was a lockpick that allowed me to see the one detail in the room that didn't belong. My pain wasn't a liability. It was a lens. It allowed me to see the truth. And Lily? God, Lily. She was courageous. She had survived Mrs. Gable. She had survived being stolen, renamed, and hidden. She had survived all of it. The sobs stopped. I sat up, wiping the hot, angry tears from my face. The fog of despair was burning away, replaced by a cold, clear, Arctic rage. The general was wrong. I wasn't done. I put the car in gear. But I didn't drive. I just sat there, my foot on the brake. A new thought. A new, terrifying thought. The general could suspend Major Estes. He could take her badge, her credentials, her mission. He could lock her out of the system, but he couldn't suspend Tessa. Tessa wasn't in the system. Tessa was a ghost, just like Lily. And if Margaret Alden, this phantom of a woman, had orchestrated a military-level operation to find, secure, and hide Lily, if she had gone to all that trouble to erase Emily and create Lily, a child with no past, what were the chances she would leave Lily's only friend, her sister, her only link to her real life, just sitting there? Margaret wouldn't just have wanted Lily to be gone. She would have wanted her to be alone. She wouldn't just have hidden Lily. She would have wanted to get rid of the only other person in the world who knew her secret. Me. Tessa. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. Margaret Alden didn't just want Lily to disappear. She wanted me to disappear too. I took my foot off the brake. The car rolled forward. I knew where I was going. I wasn't investigating Lily's file anymore. I was going to investigate my own. I didn't drive back to Fort Hood. I didn't drive back to Waco. I drove south toward the coast, toward the place where Tessa had been erased and Celine had been invented. I drove to Houston. The car felt like a decompression chamber, the only place I could process the last few days. The general's betrayal, the memory of Mrs. Gable, the impossible fact of Margaret Alden. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my heart was a cold, hard knot. The logic of my new mission was the only thing holding me together. If Margaret Alden wanted Lily to disappear, she would have wanted me to disappear too. I was no longer Major Estes, a suspended officer. I was Tessa, the primary witness, the loose end. The Harris County Adoption Records Office was exactly what you'd expect. A sterile beige room under buzzing fluorescent lights, smelling of old paper and stale coffee. It was the temple of American bureaucracy. I wasn't here as a soldier. I was here as a private citizen, an orphan searching for her roots. I waited in line for 45 minutes before I got to a clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a nameplate that read, Ms. Peters. "Hi," I said, forcing a civilian pleasantness that felt foreign. "I'm here to request my original adoption file. My birth name was Tessa." She typed my name into an ancient-looking computer terminal. Her fingernails, painted a chipped, bright pink, clicked on the keys. She sighed, the long, weary sigh of someone who did this all day. "Tessa. With no last name?" "That's correct. I was a ward of the state, transferred from St. Mary's in Waco." More clicking. She squinted at the screen. "Okay, I see a file, but I can't give it to you." My blood pressure spiked. "Why not?" "It's sealed," she said, not looking up. "Sealed? By whom?" "I'm the adoptee." "By Texas law, I have the right to petition." "It's sealed by request of the sponsor, ma'am," she said, her voice flat, already looking past me to the next person in line. The word hit me. "Sponsor?" My voice was sharper than I intended. I thought I had a normal adoption. From the state. Ms. Peters finally looked at me, annoyed. She sighed again, clicked a few more times, and read from the screen in a monotone. "It says here a significant private donation was attached to your case. The adoption was fast-tracked. As part of the deal, the file was sealed. Nothing I can do." Next. I was dismissed. I stood there, stunned. A sponsor? A donation? I walked out of the government building and into the humid Houston air. My investigative mind was racing, connecting dots. A sealed file. A fast-tracked adoption. This wasn't normal. This wasn't the state finding a home for a lonely orphan. This was a transaction. A sealed file just means you have to find the person who has the key. It took me 6 hours, a database search using my private investigator's license, and a lot of dead-end phone calls. But I found her. The social worker. The woman whose signature was at the bottom of my adoption placement. Her name was Joan Albright. Retired. Living in a small condo in Galveston. I drove the 50 miles to the coast, the air getting thicker, saltier. Galveston was an island of old-world charm and ghosts. It felt appropriate. I found Mrs. Albright's condo, a small, neat place in a complex painted pale yellow. She was an older woman, maybe in her late 70s, with kind eyes and a frail, bird-like frame. She looked confused when she saw me at her door. Mrs. Albright? Yes. My name is Celine Estes. I think you were the social worker who handled my adoption, almost 20 years ago. My name was Tessa. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face. Tessa, she whispered, her hand flying to her throat. Oh my goodness, I always wondered. Please, come in, child. She led me to a small, sun-filled living room. We sat. I didn't know where to start. So I reached into my bag and pulled out the one picture I had from that time. A faded, cracked photo of me and Lily, arms around each other, squinting in the Texas sun. I handed it to her. This was my best friend, Lily. Joan Albright took the photo. Her hand trembled. She looked at it, and her eyes filled with tears. Oh, God, she wept, the tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. I was right. It wasn't right. What wasn't right, Mrs. Albright? I asked, my voice gentle. Your adoption, dear, she said, dabbing her eyes. It was. It was all so strange. I had you and Lily both on my caseload. Two bright, inseparable little girls. And then, she took a shaky breath. Then, this perfect couple shows up. The Estes. Good family, good job, sterile home. They wanted to adopt, but they were specific. They wanted you, and only you. And then the donation came, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. A massive donation to St. Mary's, from a private benefactor. The orphanage had never seen that much money. My heart was a cold stone in my chest. And the donation, she said, looking me right in the eyes, it came with a condition. That you, Tessa, be removed from St. Mary's. Immediately. They wanted to separate us, I whispered. They didn't just want to separate you, she said, her voice full of an old, deep guilt. They wanted to expedite you, I argued. I said it was unethical to break that kind of bond. I said you and Lily were sisters in all but blood. But the money? It was already in the bank. The lawyers got involved. My boss told me to sign the papers or lose my job. It was all legal. It was a private adoption, sponsored. The final piece of the puzzle. The one I was dreading. Who? I asked, my voice barely audible. Who was the sponsor, Joan? Who paid to have me taken away? She looked at the photo, at the two little girls. She cried silently for a moment. I wasn't supposed to keep this, she said. It could have gotten me disbarred. But it was the most evil thing I'd ever seen done in my career, and I needed proof I wasn't crazy. She went to an old desk and pulled out a manila folder. From it, she slid a single piece of paper, a faded blue-green carbon copy of a cashier's check. My hand was shaking as I took it, and there, in the from line, typed in clean, serif font, were the words I already knew I would see. The Undone Family Fund. I went numb. It was a physical sensation, a creeping cold that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. Margaret Undone. The ghost. The grieving mother. She hadn't just found Emily Lily and hidden her in Waco. She had found her, hidden her, and then, with the cold precision of a surgeon, she had systematically, deliberately, cut me out. She had looked at her stolen, traumatized daughter. She had seen the one person in the world who made her feel safe, her one friend, her only friend, and she had paid to have me removed, to have me shipped off and erased just to ensure that Lily would be completely, utterly alone. I sat in my car, parked on the Galveston seawall, looking out at the gray, choppy waves of the Gulf of Mexico. The salt spray hit the windshield. This pain was worse than the general's. His was the lashing out of a man blinded by grief. This was the calculated, sociopathic cruelty of a monster. My entire life, my deep, unshakable feeling of being alone. It wasn't a personality quirk. It was a design. It was engineered. And my promise to Lily. Tessa will never leave you. I hadn't broken it. I hadn't failed. I was stolen from her. Margaret Alden had ripped me from her side. She had made me a traitor in Lily's eyes, the friend who had just disappeared. The numbness evaporated, replaced by something I had never felt before. It wasn't the hot anger of Mrs. Gable or the frustrated rage at the general. It was a cold, pure, righteous fury. This wasn't about the army anymore. This wasn't about a career. This was about Tessa and Lily. This rage was bigger than the U.S. Army. It was bigger than any ghost. And now there was nothing in this world that could stop me. The rage that had carried me out of Galveston was a high-octane fuel. It burned cold and clean, propelling me back to my apartment in Killeen with a singular purpose. I was no longer Major Estes, the suspended officer. I was Tessa, the investigator, and I had a warrant of my own. I tore my apartment apart, not in chaos, but with precision. I found the file I had copied from Colonel Matthews's office. Back then, I had been looking for a political connection, for Harold Vance. I had been looking for a soldier. Now, I was looking for a mother. I scanned the documents again, my eyes flying past the military codes and logistics jargon. I was looking for the civilian side, the placement, the handoff, and there it was. It wasn't a military base. It wasn't a government facility. It was an address. A simple, residential address in Lake Charles, Louisiana. It was attached to a foster care transfer, authorized by Matthews's logistics unit under the emergency hurricane pretext. The receiving family's name, Carter. The rage didn't evaporate. It solidified into a plan. I didn't sleep. I packed a small duffel bag, my personal laptop, and the picture of me and Lily. I didn't take my uniform. I got in my car and drove east on US 190 toward the border. I drove through the night, the flat, dry scrubland of central Texas dissolving into the dense, dark pines of East Texas. I crossed the Sabine River as the first hint of dawn was bruising the sky. The moment I crossed the border, the world changed. I left the dry, disciplined, predictable world of Texas and the U.S. Army behind. I had entered Louisiana. The air itself was different. It was thick, humid, and heavy, smelling of damp earth, pine, and the distant salty tang of the Gulf of Mexico. This was Creole country. The road signs, the architecture, the very color of the light. It all felt different. Slower, older, more complicated. It was a fitting place to find a ghost. By 10 a.m., I was in Lake Charles, a city that felt more like a sprawling town, a mix of casinos, chemical plants, and quiet, oak-lined streets. The address from Matthews's file wasn't in the city proper. It was north, in a small, quiet community called Moss Bluff. I found the street. It was lined with modest, single-story homes, the kind with small boats parked in the driveways and big, shady trees. I parked in front of a small, neat brick house with a garden full of azaleas. My heart was a trip hammer. She could be gone. She could have moved years ago. This could be another dead end. I walked up the path and rang the bell. A moment later, the door opened. A woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a warm, open face looked out. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft with that gentle southern Louisiana accent. "Mrs. Carter?" "I am," she said, squinting a little. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "My name is Celine Estes. I know this is going to sound strange, but I'm looking for someone who may have lived with you, almost 20 years ago. A girl you fostered. Her name was Lily." The woman's face didn't close off. It softened. She put a hand to her chest. "Oh, Lord," she said, her voice full of recognition. "Lily. Of course, I remember Lily. She was our girl." She looked at me, her gaze searching. "Please, honey, come inside. It's too hot to stand out there." She led me into a living room that smelled of coffee and cinnamon. It was a home, a real one. "Are you a friend of hers?" Mrs. Carter asked, sitting across from me. "I was," I said, my voice thick. "We were at St. Mary's together, in Waco. We were best friends." Mrs. Carter's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, honey," she said. "St. Mary's. Yes, that child. She was a good girl, so sweet. But she had such nightmares when she first came to us." My breath caught. "Nightmares?" "Terrible ones," she said, shaking her head. "She'd wake up screaming. She'd dream about soldiers and about a girl named Tessa." My heart stopped. It just stopped. "Tessa," I whispered. "That's right," Mrs. Carter nodded. "She would cry and cry. She'd say, 'Tessa promised.' She said, 'Tessa promised she would never leave me.'" I couldn't speak. The guilt that Margaret Alden had so carefully engineered, the lie that I had abandoned her, it was real. Lily had lived with it. "She thought I left her," I finally managed to say, the words like glass in my throat. "Oh, baby, no," Mrs. Carter said, leaning forward. "She was just a child. She was hurt. She missed her friend. She's a wonderful woman now. Our Lily. She's a nurse, over at the hospital. St. Pat's. She was here. She was real. She was a nurse. She's okay?" "She's more than okay," Mrs. Carter beamed, a mother's pride shining in her face. "She's a light. She helps people. She's the kindest person I know. Though, still quiet, still keeps a part of herself locked away, you know? Like she's still missing something." I was missing her too. I went to the hospital. It was a low, sprawling building. I walked in, my boots clicking on the linoleum, feeling completely out of place in my jeans and t-shirt. I felt like I was vibrating, my nerves stretched so thin I could hear them humming. I asked for Lily Carter. The receptionist directed me to the orthopedic rehab wing. I walked down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. And then I saw her. She was older, taller, a woman. But she was her. The same wild, curly brown hair, pulled back in a ponytail. The same pale skin. She was standing next to an elderly man who was struggling with a walker. She was leaning in, speaking to him with a gentle patience, her smile soft. And then she looked up. She looked right at me, standing at the end of the hall. She froze. Her smile faded. Her hand, which had been on the man's arm, just stopped. The man looked at her, confused. "Lily? Honey?" She didn't hear him. She was staring at me. Her eyes, they were the same piercing, haunted blue eyes from the photograph, the same eyes I remembered from the playground at St. Mary's. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. This was it. 20 years. 20 years of lies and pain and separation, all collapsing into this one silent moment in a hospital hallway. I took one shaky step forward. "Lily?" Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "It's me," I whispered, the tears I'd refused to shed finally blurring my vision. "It's Tessa." We sat by the lake, just outside the hospital. The air was thick and humid, the sound of cicadas a dull roar in the background. She was still in her blue scrubs, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. I told her everything. I told her about the photo on the general's desk. I told her his name was Robert Alden and that he was her father. I told her about the birthmark, the little crescent moon near her collarbone. She unconsciously reached up and touched the spot, her eyes wide. And then I told her the hardest part, the part I had just learned. I told her about Margaret, the wife, the ghost, the woman who had hired soldiers to move her, to hide her. And then I told her the truth I had learned in Galveston. About the check. about the sponsorship, about how I hadn't left her. I was taken. When I finished, she didn't cry. She just sat there, staring out at the dark water. The silence stretched, heavy and hot. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, a soft Louisiana whisper, but underneath it, there was a core of steel I recognized. "That woman," she said, her voice shaking with a cold, precise anger. "She didn't just take my life." She turned to look at me, her blue eyes, his blue eyes, boring into mine. "She took my father, and she took my only friend." She held my gaze. "She took everything." I reached out and put my hand over her clenched, white-knuckled fist. "It's time to take it back," I said. "Both of us." The drive back to Texas was a blur of asphalt and adrenaline. We didn't talk much, Lily and I. We didn't need to. A 20-year bond of shared trauma and stolen history had been reforged in an instant, and it was stronger than steel. The rage I'd felt in Galveston had found its purpose. The quiet, deep-seated anger Lily had carried her whole life had finally found a name. We were not victims anymore. We were a reckoning. We drove back across the Sabine River, leaving the humid, moss-covered world of Louisiana behind and re-entering the harsh, disciplined landscape of Texas. But this time, I wasn't running. I was invading. As we neared Fort Hood, I picked up my phone. My fingers were steady. I knew exactly who to call. General Alden answered on the first ring. His voice was strained, tired. "Estes?" "General," I said, my voice cold and flat, all military protocol gone. "I've found your daughter, Emily." Silence on the line, just the sound of a sharp, ragged inhale. She's alive?" he whispered. "She is," I said. "And she knows who you are. We're driving to your home. We'll be there in 20 minutes. "My home? Yes, of course, anything." "One more thing, General," I cut him off. "I need you to make a call. I need Undersecretary Harold Vance to be there." Another pause, this one full of suspicion. "Vance? What the hell does he have to do with this?" "He has everything to do with this," I said. "He's the reason she was hidden. He's the man who helped his sister. If you want to see your daughter, if you want the truth, make the call. He'll come. He won't be able to resist seeing this for himself." I hung up before he could argue. Lily looked at me from the passenger seat. "Are you ready for this?" I looked back at her. Her, a nurse in scrubs. Me, a suspended officer in jeans. We were the two discards of society. "Tessa promised she'd never leave you," I said. "We're doing this together." We pulled up to the General's stately home on the base, the same one where I'd had polite dinners. This time, I parked the car like I owned the place, right in the circular drive. The front door opened before we even got to the steps. General Alden stood in the doorway, a broken man. He looked 10 years older than he had just a week ago. Beside him, looking pale and furious, was Undersecretary Harold Vance. His eyes, small and dark, locked onto me with pure venom. Then the General looked past me, at the young woman standing at my side. His eyes, the same piercing blue eyes, met hers. Time stopped. His face crumpled. "Emily," he breathed. Tears were streaming down his face, completely unashamed. "Oh God, Emily, it's you." He took a shaky step forward, his arms open, his gaze fixed on her. "My child, my daughter." Lily just stared at him, her entire stolen past swirling in that one painful look. She was trembling. The General was halfway across the foyer to her, ready to embrace the daughter he thought he'd lost forever. "Robert, don't you dare touch her." The voice was cold, sharp, dripping with ice and authority. It came from the sweeping staircase that dominated the entryway. We all looked up. General Alden froze, his arms still outstretched. He looked like he'd been turned to stone. Harold Vance closed his eyes. A small, defeated sigh escaped his lips. A woman was descending the stairs. She was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a dark blue sheath dress, pearls at her throat. She wasn't a ghost. She was vibrant, beautiful, and terrifyingly alive. It was the woman from the photographs, Margaret Alden. General Alden's face was a mask of utter, complete horror. His voice was a strangled whisper. Margaret, but you're dead. I buried you. The car. The fire. Oh, stop it, Robert, Margaret snapped, stepping onto the polished marble floor. She didn't look at Lily. She didn't look at me. She only looked at her husband, her eyes filled with a bored contempt. I was never dead. I was just done. She gestured dismissively toward Vance. I just needed you to believe I was dead so I could finally leave you and be with Harold. A boating accident in the Mediterranean. So much cleaner than a messy divorce, don't you think? Vance, her brother, looked away, ashamed. You faked your death? Alden was gasping, leaning against a pillar for support. Of course I did, Margaret said, finally turning her cold gaze on the general. You were always so weak, Robert. Weak in your grief, weak with your responsibilities, and weakest of all, for that. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Lily. This was it, the room of truth. Lily, who had been frozen in shock, now found her voice. She took a single, brave step forward, away from me and into the center of the room. Why? Lily's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. I was a child. Why would you do this to me? Margaret Alden finally looked at her. It wasn't a look of remorse, it was a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. Because you, Margaret said, her voice dropping, are not my child. She let the words hang in the air, a public execution. You are not my family. You are the result of one of Robert's indiscretions, a dirty little secret from a tour in Germany. The general let out a sound, a wounded, guttural moan. You were a stain, child, Margaret continued, her voice devoid of any human warmth. A walking, breathing reminder of his failure. I told him to get rid of you then, but he was too honorable. So when you were kidnapped in Dallas, Margaret said with a cruel laugh, it was a gift, a miracle. Imagine my horror when Harold's people found you, years later, in a Waco orphanage. I couldn't let you come back. I couldn't let you ruin my family, my life. So yes, she spat, I had you moved, I had you hidden. I did you a favor by letting you live as a nobody. I did what I had to do to protect my real family. The silence that followed was absolute. The truth was finally out, in all its ugly, brutal, and remorseless glory. General Alden understood it all now. He looked at Harold Vance, his brother-in-law, his friend, the man who had helped him hunt for his missing daughter while knowing he was just covering for his sister. Then he looked at Margaret, the wife he had mourned, the woman who had not only betrayed him, but who had faked her own death to leave him, all while orchestrating this 20-year-long emotional torture. His entire world, his honor, his family, his grief, it was all a lie. It had collapsed in on itself. But Lily wasn't done. I stepped forward, into the light, standing beside her. And you paid, I said, my voice ringing out, loud and clear. You paid to have me adopted. You paid to have me taken away from her, just to make sure she was completely alone. Margaret just sneered. Lily looked at her. She wasn't trembling anymore. She wasn't a victim. She stood tall, a survivor, a nurse, a woman who had built a life from the ashes Margaret had left her. You were wrong, Lily said, her voice clear and strong. You called me a stain. Mrs. Gable called me trash. The general called me a fantasy. You all tried to throw us away. She reached out and for the first time grabbed my hand, linking us together. We are not discards, Lily said, looking right into Margaret's cold, dead eyes. We survived. The explosion in General Alden's foyer wasn't just emotional. It was a detonation that echoed all the way to Washington, D.C. In the hours that followed, military police, who had been called by a shattered General Alden, quietly took Margaret Alden and a pale, silent Harold Vance into custody. The room of truth became a crime scene. Lily and I were taken to a separate, quiet office on the base. We sat in silence, two orphans in the eye of a hurricane, still clutching each other's hands. The next day, the world broke. The headlines were merciless. Pentagon Undersecretary resigns amid family kidnapping scandal. General Alden's wife, presumed dead, arrested for 20-year conspiracy. The Alden tragedy, a tale of infidelity, deception, and abuse of power. It was a feeding frenzy. Margaret and Vance were facing a long list of federal charges, including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and falsifying government records. The emergency hurricane order was the nail in their coffin. But for me, the most significant fallout wasn't their arrest. It was my vindication. The Army, in a frantic attempt at damage control, launched an internal investigation. But the truth was already out. My suspension was immediately and quietly lifted. The real reckoning, however, came a month later. General Alden, true to his word, resigned his command. He took full responsibility for his blindness, for his failure to protect his daughter, and for his abuse of power in silencing me. His final act as an officer was to testify, under oath, before a closed-session Senate Armed Services Committee in Washington, D.C. I was there. I sat in my dress uniform, my major's leaf pin gleaming, and watched Robert Alden, now a civilian in a simple suit, address the senators. "I was a fool," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "My grief and my pride made me blind. I had an officer, Major Estes, who did exactly what the Army trained her to do. She sought the truth. She brought it to me, and I punished her for it. I used her past as a weapon against her. I failed as a general, and I failed as a man." He then turned in that formal wood-paneled room and looked directly at me. "Major Estes, I publicly apologize to you in my resignation. But I want to do it again. My actions were inexcusable. You represent the very honor I claim to be protecting. I am profoundly sorry." I just nodded, once. My own testimony was short. I told them about St. Mary's, about Lily, about Brené Brown's definition of courage. I told them, the Army values are duty, respect, and honor. But honor isn't about protecting a perfect image. It's about the courage to face an imperfect truth. That's what I tried to do. That's what I will always try to do. My career was intact. My name was clear. Major Estes had been fully restored. But Tessa was still healing. A few months passed. The leaves in Central Texas turned a dusty gold. The scandal faded into the next news cycle. I took a long overdue leave of absence. I drove my car out west, deep into the Texas Hill Country, to the ranch where General Alden, now just Robert, was living. He and Lily were there. She had taken a leave of absence from the hospital in Louisiana, choosing, for the first time, to face the past she had never known. When I arrived, they were in a field, trying to repair a long stretch of old cedar post fence. It was awkward. I watched them for a moment from the car. They were like two strangers forced to share a space. He, the former general, used to commanding thousands, now fumbling with a hammer. She, the nurse, used to giving care, now awkwardly receiving it. They were learning a new language. I got out of the car. "Looks like you could use a hand," I said. Robert looked up, relief on his face. "Celine, you came." Lily smiled, a small, shy smile. "Hey, Tessa." I grabbed a pair of gloves and joined them. We worked in the warm autumn sun, the three of us mending the fence. At one point, Robert was struggling to hold a post straight while Lily tried to secure the wire. "I wasted 20 years, Emily," he said suddenly, his voice thick with regret. 20 years. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be a father." Lily stopped, her hands on the wire. She looked at him, her eyes holding his. "I don't know how to be a daughter," she said softly. "But we have time. We can learn." He nodded, a tear tracing a line through the dust on his cheek. That evening, he turned to me as we sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. "Major." "No, Celine," he said. "Your courage. It wasn't just a soldier's courage. It was something more. You saved us both. Me from my lies and her from a life without a past. Have you? Have you forgiven me? For what I said? For my blindness? I watched the sunset. I thought of the man in the office, the one who had screamed at me, who had called me a damaged orphan. He was gone. In his place was just a man, full of regret. I understand, I said. Margaret didn't just attack me, she attacked your greatest fear. The fear of being a failure. The fear that you were right to feel guilty. And you were never my enemy, Robert. You were just her first victim. We stayed there, at the ranch, until November. Lily, who had officially changed her name to Lily Emily Alden, and I had spent weeks just talking. We talked about St. Mary's, about Mrs. Gable, about her life in Louisiana, my life in the Army. We were filling in the 20-year hole that Margaret had dug between us. Then came the fourth Thursday of the month. Thanksgiving. It was the first Thanksgiving for all of us. Robert's first without the shadow of his wife, Lily's first with a father, and my first, well, my first real one. They invited me. The small ranch house was warm, filled with the smell of roasting turkey and pumpkin pie. It was just the three of us. We sat at the small wooden table. Robert brought the turkey, perfectly browned. Lily brought out a bowl of sweet potatoes. I, having no domestic skills, was in charge of the wine. Robert stood at the head of the table, carving knife in hand. He looked at Lily, then at me. His eyes were full. He raised his glass. I'm not much for speeches anymore, he said, his voice thick. But I need to make a toast. To family. He looked at Lily. Not the one we're born into. Not the one defined by blood or by lies. He looked at me. To the family we choose, he said. The family we fight for. The family we build from the truth. To Lily and to Celine. Welcome home. We clinked glasses. Lily looked across the table at me, and she smiled. It wasn't the small, shy smile of the woman at the fence. It wasn't the haunted look of the girl in the photo. It was the smile from the playground at St. Mary's. The one I thought I'd lost forever. The one that was pure and free. I smiled back, and in that moment, sitting in a small ranch house in the Texas Hill Country, surrounded by the smell of turkey and the warmth of two survivors, I felt the two halves of my life click into place. The walls I had built, the armor I had worn, they were gone. I was no longer Tessa, the broken orphan. I was no longer just Major Estes, the disciplined soldier. I was Celine. 1 year later. I'm standing on a stage at Fort Hood. The auditorium is filled with the best and brightest of the U.S. Army. Young officers, fresh from West Point and ROTC programs, their uniforms crisp, their faces earnest. I'm in my dress uniform, the same one I wore when I stood before the Senate committee. But this time, I'm not an inspector. I'm not a witness. I'm the keynote speaker. My topic is honor and the moral compass. I look out at the sea of faces. They see Major Celine Estes, an officer commended for integrity, a success story. They see the armor. They don't see the scars. They don't see the little girl named Tessa. But today, I'm not here to talk about the armor. I'm here to talk about what it protects. Good morning, I begin, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. The Army teaches us a lot about honor. We memorize the values: duty, respect, selfless service, integrity, personal courage. I'm not here to talk about those definitions. I'm here to tell you a story about what happens when those values are tested, not by an enemy on a battlefield, but by the very people in your own chain of command. I tell them my story. I tell them about a child in an orphanage in Waco, bullied by a cruel administrator named Mrs. Gable, who told her she was trash and would never be anything. I can see the young officers frowning, confused as to where this is going. I tell them about a grieving general, a good man, so blinded by his own pain that he used his power to silence the truth, to protect the memory of a lie. I see the officers shift, uncomfortable. We don't talk about superiors failing us. I tell them about a high society woman, Margaret Alden. and a high-ranking politician, Harold Vance, who used the full power of the United States government, false reports, sealed records, emergency protocols, to bury a child and then to bury a second child, just to protect a family's reputation. And then, I tell them about the lesson I learned in my darkest moment, sitting in my car on the side of a Texas highway. I learned about courage, I say, from a fellow Texan, a researcher named Brené Brown. She taught me that vulnerability is not weakness, but our most accurate measure of courage. My greatest wound, my past as an orphan, the thing my superior used to silence me, wasn't my weakness. It was my strength. It was the only reason I could see the truth when no one else could. I lean forward, my eyes connecting with the front row. The Army teaches you to obey the chain of command, and you must. But there will come a day when that chain conflicts with your moral compass, when you are asked to be silent, when you are told to stand down because the truth is inconvenient. Honor, I say, my voice filling the quiet hall, is not about following orders. It's not about protecting the reputation of the unit at all costs. True honor is listening to that voice inside you, that moral compass, and having the courage to speak, even when it costs you everything, even when it forces you to stand up to the very general who commands you. I finish my speech. The room is silent for a beat. Then a single captain in the third row stands up, and then another, and another. Soon the entire auditorium is on its feet, not in polite applause, but in a standing ovation. The Army's definition of honor had been challenged, and it had held. But that speech was just the beginning. The past wasn't just a story to tell, it was a call to action. Lily found her new name, Lily Emily Alden, and I found my new purpose. 2 months ago, we launched the Lily and Tessa Project. It's not a shelter, it's not a home, it's a nonprofit foundation with one goal: to give a voice to the voiceless. We fund legal advocates and private investigators for forgotten cases. Children lost in the foster care system, just like we were. Children who were moved, whose records were sealed, who were written off as discards. Our first case was a 16-year-old in Houston who had been separated from his siblings by a bureaucratic error. We got him a lawyer. They're reuniting next week. Margaret Alden used her money and power to separate us. We now use our story and the Alden name to put families back together. We are undoing what she did, one child at a time. And we're not the only ones. Robert Alden, my former general, found his own path to redemption. He and Lily, in their slow, awkward way of healing, found a shared passion. His love of flying and her childhood memory of drawing planes. They started a new program at the ranch in the Texas Hill Country. It's an aviation therapy program for veterans suffering from PTSD. They take veterans who are grounded by trauma and they teach them to fly. They give them a new perspective, a new mission. I went to visit them last week for the program's launch. They had restored a vintage 1960s trainer plane, a beautiful blue and white aircraft. As Robert was showing me the cockpit, I saw the name, painted in elegant white script on the side of the fuselage, right below the pilot's window. It was one word: Tessa. I froze. I looked at Lily, confused. She just smiled. I chose the name, she said, her voice soft. Robert asked me why. I told him. She reached out and touched the painted wing. I told him, because you, Tessa, were the one who gave me the wings to come home. I had to walk away for a moment. The name that had been my wound, my shame, the name Mrs. Gable spat like poison, was now a symbol of hope. It was a name that meant healing. Today, I'm back at Fort Hood. I'm not on stage. I'm standing in the quiet memorial grove in front of the large granite wall etched with the names of soldiers from this base who have fallen. I used to come here and feel the ghosts. I used to feel the weight of the past, the burden of secrets. Now, I just feel peace. I've learned that the past is not a prison. It's not a life sentence. It's a teacher. It's the fire that forges the armor. My armor is no longer an empty, disciplined shell. It's filled now. Filled with purpose. Filled with family. Filled with peace. There's a Bible verse that Robert Alden quoted at the Senate hearing, a verse that has stayed with me. Matthew 10:26. For there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. The truth always finds the light. And finally, I had found mine. I found my truth by sharing my story. But this journey isn't just about me. It's about all of us who have ever felt discarded, only to find our own strength. My story is one, but chosen revenge is a home for many. If my journey from Tessa to Celine meant something to you, please support our community. Like this story to let us know you were here, and comment below with one word that describes your legacy. Subscribe, so we can continue to find the light together.